Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
With great power comes great responsibility. Or so says Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. Sometimes I like to think of it more as with great power comes great anxiety, or great disappointment, or lots of things to remember. Throughout Torah, Moshe learns of the great benefit and the great frustration with power. In the book of Exodus, Moshe flees at his first chance for power. When God tells Moshe that he will be the one to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moshe refuses and says, "I'm heavy of speech and tongue." Eventually, however, he grows into his leadership role, learning to communicate intimately with God. Moshe asks questions, gives suggestions, and cries to the divine. At one point, the Torah even claims, "Kechol beiti ne'emanhu." Moshe is the most trusted in God's house. However, in Parshat Chukat, Moshe makes a mistake that prompts God to forbid him from entering the land of Israel. At the height of Moshe's power, he forgets his great responsibility, and as a result, he experiences great heartbreak. The story of Moshe's ruin is famously dramatic. After Miriam's death, the people of Israel are thirsty and cry for water, saying once again that they would have rather died in the desert with the previous generation than die of thirst now. Moshe and Aharon fall on their faces before God. God tells Moshe to raise his staff to gather the congregation and to speak to the rock in front of them and to bring water for them from the rock. Moshe and Aharon gather the congregation of Israel and say, "Shimu na hamorim hamina sela hazen notzi lachem mayim." Listen up, you rebels. From this rock shall we bring out water for you. The text continues, and Moshe raised up his hand and he hit the rock with his staff twice, and many waters went out, and the congregation and their cattle drank. As a result of this act, God is furious. God says, "Behold, you have not believed in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, you will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given to you." The commentators puzzle about what Moshe and maybe Aharon did wrong. So before I continue, any ideas that you've heard before or that you've thought of before? What did Moshe and maybe Aharon do wrong? Rhonda? Great, I don't have to continue my Dvar Torah. That's the answer that we're going with, but we can hear other ones. So Rhonda said, rather than shall we provide water for you, really God's the one who's providing the water. And so because Moshe doesn't acknowledge God, that's what he did wrong. John? God didn't like them, his attitude calling them rebels. So that's actually, that is Rambam's take also. So Rambam thinks that Moshe is being too angry and a leader should not show their anger publicly. So that's according to Rambam. So it was, God wanted Moshe to speak to the rock, and that's very Rashi of you. But other commentators argue against that because God does say, take your staff. So why would Moshe need his staff if he was just speaking if he was just supposed to speak to the rock? Okay, so it's a symbol that he's in charge. And Rusty, and then John, and then we'll go on.
There was no blessing. I would expect there to be a blessing. People went through something.
So it's kind of similar to what Rhonda was saying, that there should be some blessing or some acknowledgement before we did, sort of?
Well, a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we say a blessing, it's a formal, it brings the people to praise God.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is
Right. So some sort of blessing and gathering and acknowledgement of God a welcoming to praise God. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So. Yeah. So the staff is supposed to signify, in a sense, God's power, not just Moshe's power. And there's a poem that I shared last night that I can share with anybody who's interested later, about not so much Moshe's staff, but about his hands, the holy nature of Moshe raising his hands. So we'll go back to what Rhonda introduced us to. Right? And that's the comments of Ramban. He's a 13th century Ashkenazi commentator, and when Moshe and Aharon say, "Shall we, notzi, bring you water?" instead of "Shall God bring you water?" they take full credit for the miracle God effects. So therefore they fail to, quote, sanctify God in the eyes of the children of Israel. Moshe and Aharon have been given their power expressly for the purpose of publicizing God's name, and instead they use that power to aggrandize their own. Moshe's story of growth through acknowledging and wielding power ends at the opposite extreme from where it started. Moshe arrives at his demise through such a comfort with power that he forgets to give gratitude for the source of it. It is no new insight that power can corrupt. We see it in history, we see it in politics, and more directly in everyday situations. As human beings, we all find ourselves in positions of power. We are parents and teachers, bosses, citizens of a world that relies on each and every one of us. With power, we have the platform to teach and to guide towards the values we hold sacred. If Moshe had not raised his voice in the first place, we would not have gotten out of Egypt. If Moshe had not tested his limits and convinced God time and time again to spare the Israelites for whatever wrongdoing they had done that day, the people Israel might no longer exist. The challenge for Moshe and for us is to recognize those who give us power, those who initially brought us here, those who have worked with us, and most importantly, those we serve. Just a few minutes ago, we installed Congregation Beth Torah's newest board of directors, a wise, compassionate group of people with the power to shape the future of our congregation and our Jewish people. As with every leadership team in our synagogue and elsewhere, this board of directors cannot succeed without the acknowledgement of those who brought out water, who brought us to where we are now. With every decision we make, we must be thinking about the ideals set up by our founders and developed since then. Those ideals: inclusion, egalitarianism, welcoming community. With every conversation we have as a board, we must be thinking about the Torah our community was named after and still relies on for its core values. A Torah that teaches respect and compassion alongside rebuke and righteousness. More specifically, we emulate that Torah by speaking to one another with great patience and kindness at meetings and even in email chains. As we would not be leaders of our congregation without community members themselves, we listen to and we consider the thoughts and the opinions of our fellow congregants when they give input. This even applies, maybe especially applies, when we disagree with their words. When another board member or community member has contributed to something for which we are praised, we make sure they receive recognition too. And when someone leads a service or event that's particularly meaningful to us, we liberally use the words "thank you." At every turn, we, the leadership of the congregation, acknowledge that none of us lead alone. If even God expects recognition from Moshe, we too must recognize those who support our work, those who have supported our work, and those for whom we perform that work. In a community that values participation so highly, almost everyone in this room has led something here. If you haven't yet, don't worry. Someone will volunteer you for something soon. Beyond respect for and gratitude towards the people with and for whom you serve, you also have the responsibility to be like Moshe and to remember God, to remember the role of God in your leadership. You too have the responsibility to keep God in mind when you make decisions about the length and content of services, what we do and do not do on Shabbat and holidays, how we create opportunities for new membership, and how we set limits where they are inevitably needed. For all who hold leadership roles at Congregation Beth Torah, I look forward to continuing to practice that balance with you, the balance between confidence in leadership and gratitude to all those connected to our leadership. Shabbat Shalom. I would love to invite Ron